When I moved to California, San Francisco specifically, in 1986, AIDS was front page news. There was no marriage equality. It was still illegal in many states to even love someone, much less marry them. And one of the first people I met was a writer by the name of Dave Ford, someone with an incredible historical perspective. I'd like to welcome him again to the show tonight. Dave, how are you?
Thanks. I'm great, and I'm always happy to see you and be part of this, and I'm just sorry it's not under a little bit better circumstances than Orlando.
Yeah, I mean, every time someone talks about it this week, I feel close to tears. It's kind of rough. I mean, we ran into each other the night in the Castro.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that night, because that's when I asked you to be a guest on the show. I mean, we've put together these shows fairly quickly about Orlando.
Yeah.
That was a strange and wonderful and melancholy night the other night in the Castro.
Yeah, there's a new used bookstore, Dog-Eared Books, and it's opened by Marcus Ewert and Alvin Orloff, a couple of fellows who have been in the Castro for 30 years. And, you know, they had one of those openings with writers and wine and cheese and stuff, and there we were. And it's funny because I saw a lot of old friends there that I haven't seen in a
saw
while.
people I hadn't seen in a decade.
And yet there's this kind of a little bit of a shadow of this Orlando thing. It's so weird. I think people trying to get their heads around it. You know, you were talking to a guest previously and saying, you know, how do we come at this story both as journalists and historians, but also as gay men and human beings? There's so many sides of this thing, and it's so massive in so many ways.
How do you come at it?
Well, it's, you know, I'm sorry to say in a way that my response on the Sunday when I heard about it was sort of shut down. It was fairly cynical, and I saw it more from a standpoint of a mass shooting than from the standpoint of an LGBT-related massacre.
Was that because the news hit you, or you just said, oh, no, it's not a gay thing?
No, I don't think I denied it was a gay thing. I was like, well, this is bad, was my first thought. And then my next thought was, and nothing is going to happen in this country to change this. That was my next thought. And that's the bitter, cynical thing that happens when you've been around for a long time. It took a couple of days of reading about it and the news filtering in and who was the guy who shot the people and all that sort of stuff. Seeing what people are saying on Facebook. And then by the Tuesday, it happened on a Sunday, and by the Tuesday night I was sobbing in the arms of my partner. And that came from, I thought wasn't there, and it came up. So
yeah, no,
there was definitely sadness and pain about this whole thing, but it didn't, I had a friend who called me Sunday morning when he heard the news.
Mm-hmm. And it was early. It was like 2 a.m. there, so,
yeah.
you know, 11 a.m. here.
And he's in his mid-20s, and he's a gay man, and we've known each other for a few years, and I had suggested a couple of years ago that he get involved with the gay community because he had some resentments about it and stuff, and I was like, well, maybe one way to get over that is to participate. So he's participating and doing some community-oriented stuff, and he called me and left a message saying, you know, I've been sobbing for the last hour and a half about Orlando. And, you know, thank you for, I don't mean to take credit here, but, you know, thanks for encouraging me to be a part of the community because I really feel this thing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, he's crying. That's good. I'm not. You know, then a couple days later.
You have since then.
Yes, I have. It's very sad.
Yeah, you know, I mean, when I met you, you were writing for the San Francisco Sentinel, you wrote for Bay Times, you wrote for the Chronicle. I have in years past called the late 80s the golden age of queer journalism in San Francisco because there was a lot of papers, there were a lot of great writers. I mean, I'm not blowing smoke up your tush. I mean, you were one of the people that really defined gay journalism back during the AIDS era.
For better and worse, I would say.
Right. So, you know, we're 30 years on since then. How big a story, in the perspective of those 30 years, is Orlando?
Well, maybe
Are we going to be talking about this like we're talking about Stonewall 50 years on?
I don't know yet. I honestly don't know yet. I think because the problem is, for me, there came a point where in my 40s, I'm now nearly 60 at the end of this year, so I was in my mid-20s when I moved into the city in 1983. And there was a point in my 40s where for a short while, I moved out of the city and I was living in the suburbs. And so I was a gay man not in a gay area. And you know, that was a different way of being openly gay in part of the world. And I think at some point when we maybe personally finish our identities or our coming outs and our who are we and how do we be in relationships and all that stuff, we're eventually going to turn our eyes to the world because there are a lot of other things going on. There's climate change and there's presidential elections and so forth, right? So maybe it's those world eyes that at first saw Orlando in not just a queer context, but a gun violence context and a mass shooting context in America during the presidential election context. So I don't know if we'll talk about this in 30 years the same way.
Yeah, I mean, you raised something interesting for me. I mean, just, not to personalize it, but I don't know how not to personalize a story like this. My reaction was instantly, oh God, here we go again. And I thought of Virginia Tech because I'm from Virginia.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, it's 49, that's bad. He was Muslim, oh God. And then I hear it's a gay bar, and I think I fought it. Because, I will admit it, I guess we all deal with coming out differently, but I worked very hard to be that gay guy that I was out, but boy, I didn't want anyone to know I was gay. Not because I was ashamed to be gay, but I wanted to show that, I can be a business person and wear a suit too. So I've always kind of fought that's a gay thing.
Yeah.
It's not a gay thing.
Yeah.
And by Tuesday, I walked into one of my clients' offices just to get coffee, and all she did was to turn to me and say, "How are you?" And I completely broke down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I suddenly realized that, at least for me, it was a gay thing.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, do you think we, as a community, are being selfish by saying this was a gay thing?
No, I don't think so at all. I think, again, there's that larger context of gun violence and all that other stuff, but zeroed down, this happened in a queer bar, which for many people is a safe space and a space of refuge where people, LGBT people who aren't comfortable yet being out of the closet or open about their sexual orientation or their gender orientation can feel safe and have fun. You know what I mean? And so the symbology of it, or the symbolism of it, is just terrible. But the thing is, as the news starts to filter out, and I'm still not clear, this is like a week and a half later, I guess, that we're taping this, it is beginning to look like the shooter, Omar Mateen, might have had leanings towards men and felt terrible about it. And, there's been countless people who have that exact same thing. They become politicians who enact anti-gay legislation, and they do all this kind of stuff because they're split off from themselves. He was just able to go into a gun store, get a mass shooting gun, and do a mass shooting.
Right. Every time I hear someone being just virulently homophobic, like that minister in Sacramento the other day that said we should be lined up against a wall and shot, I think, what's that line from Macbeth? The lady doth protest too much.
Yeah, let's look at the websites he goes to at midnight.
Right. So, we're laughing about it because I found my straight friends.
Yeah.
They are almost ashamed, even if they've read something, to say, oh, God, maybe Omar Mateen was closeted gay, because somehow that will offend us. Yeah. And I actually have found myself being the one to people going, yeah, I think maybe that was it. There's like this weird struggle with our non-gay friends saying, oh, my God, well, does that make it more or less gay? And does it matter?
Right. I think you asked the question about 30 years from now. I think even 30 days or 30 weeks from now, the conversation will be different in one sense because not all the facts are out. I mean, we want to have this symbolic conversation when we don't know quite everything yet. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's important to know that we don't know everything about the shooter and we don't know everything about everything yet. One of the responses I did have was an immediate feeling of empathy for, obviously, the victims, those killed and injured, and then you can see the wide swath of their family. I mean, you can just imagine it, right? Like the pebble goes into the pond, and the feelings go out through parents and friends and coworkers and so forth. But I felt the same for the shooter. I felt like this poor guy, like if you're that, excuse me, you're that deeply messed up, whether it's around sexual orientation issues or just whatever it is, that was a man in a lot of pain. Now, it took me a long time in life to realize that I can empathize with and be compassionate about people without condoning poor behavior.
Yeah.
So my feeling of like, I can imagine the kind of pain that guy was in.
Well, I guess that maybe is part of the pain too. I mean, honestly, I don't think I've ever felt anything in common with, Muhammad Atta, who, threw a plane into the World Trade Center. But I did feel, looking at Omar Mateen's pictures, I was like, wow, how much different is it to be a young Catholic boy in Richmond, Virginia that goes to confession 3 times because he's thinking impure thoughts, and a young man in Florida whose father, based on what we've read, every day is slamming down another religion's perverted version of self-hate and homophobia. I mean, the thing that got me as the week went on was I just wish the father would shut up. I was like, I don't know about you, but if my son just killed 49 people and got killed, I don't think I'd be granting interviews to CNN. I don't think I'd be able to put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
What do you think about the father?
I don't know. I don't know him, and I haven't talked to him, and I'm always hesitant to make a
So I'm being unfair.
I don't know. No. You're completely welcome to your observation. What was interesting was that the father did say publicly that God will take care of gays or something. So, and I thought, well, if indeed the shooter, Omar Mateen, had leanings towards men in terms of his sexual orientation and was conflicted about it and confused, and if indeed this stuff was going on, which are facts we're still waiting to confirm, then you could see maybe where one leg of the fence was when it came to the kind of anti-gay feelings he might have had, because the apple isn't falling far from the tree.
Right. Is this something that it is difficult for non-gay people to comprehend?
What is that?
That a person who is gay would, because he's gay, go and kill 49 other people because they were gay.
Look, I think we have to sort of say that whatever his orientation stuff and all that other stuff, there are lots of people who have struggled with being what we call in the closet, or leaning in a direction and not wanting to do it, and who have chosen to marry and have kids and all this other stuff, right? They don't shoot people, right? They don't buy an AK-47 or an AR-15 and go in and slaughter a whole club full of people. That's a unique situation that, again, there's mental health issues. There's in the mix. There's parental issues. There's possibly religious issues. He misted the air by calling, or put smoke in the air by calling 911 and claiming that he was part of ISIS. I mean, who knows what it was?
Yeah, I mean, it's like as the week went on, I kept waiting for because also news media likes to put kind of a nice box around stuff.
Absolutely. And politicians too.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, this box has become an octagon.
Yeah, I don't think it's a box anymore. It doesn't have any sides.
Right. When we come back, I want to talk to you about, you have written for a long time. You say you haven't written a book, but I really want you to, because I love the way, I want to talk to you about how people who do write about this can write about it, and what this means going forward for the community and maybe the 2016 election. We'll be back in a second. More of our conversation with Dave Ford about the continuing impact of Orlando. Hi, I'm David Perry. Welcome back to 10% and our continuing conversation about Orlando with writer Dave Ford. As we were talking about, there's so many ways to approach this story.
Yeah.
As a writer, as someone who, is out in the community, how do you language this going forward? I mean, now we're not quite 2 weeks on. When will we have a chance to talk about this as something it's over? Because right now it still seems like an active thing. Every day there's another horror story. Like, when I read the other day about the mother who threw herself across her son and died, I was like, rip my heart out a little more, because then I thought, the whole thing about, there's clearly a mother who loves her gay son, and the place they go to dance together, and it brought up memories of me dancing. It was just like, I just like, the night they had the protest in Castro,
yes,
Alfredo and I didn't go because I thought the last person I want to hear is a politician talking. We just stayed home.
Yeah.
How do we language this?
Let me ask you this. Are you glad you stayed home?
Yeah.
Are you?
Yeah, I didn't feel like I had missed some historical event. To me, the historical event was the killing.
Yeah.
And then when I read about it, all the people from they tried to make it political that night, which I understood, but I just kind of wanted to be quiet.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I didn't know that thing was happening because I live down in the suburbs now, so I'm not like out on the streets, so I didn't know it was happening. And it's funny, after I read that it happened, and we're talking about this sort of gathering in the Castro,
which is in the
and a candlelight thing
has happened over the years,
and that I've been to many of, and we've been to many of, especially during the AIDS years. When I heard about it, I was really glad that it happened, and I was glad that people were out in the streets. And notwithstanding politicians' comments, which can also be genuine and sincere as well as political. notwithstanding that, I was glad to read it and sort of sad I had missed it. And so you've seen the memorial at 18th and Castro, right?
Every day it grows.
It's funny that a couple days ago when I saw you, that was the first time I saw it, and
I thought it'd be gone by now.
yeah, my partner Tim and I were just sort of walking down the street, and suddenly it was there, and I couldn't believe it. And my first thought was, the gays, we really do mourning well. Of course, we do everything well when it comes to partying. But it's a beautiful kind of spontaneous thing, and these things happen everywhere now. Somebody's killed on the highway, and flowers happen, and teddy bears and memories and pictures. But there was something about this that was really touching, and photos of every single person who had died. And it reminded me that when we as a community are touched, we do respond. And how do you respond with grief and love in the face of wanting to be enraged? And how do you shape the rage that's going to be there into action?
Yeah, I mean, you asked it. I'm sorry I missed it. I mean, for me, I'm glad they did it too.
Yeah.
And they should have done it. It was, I guess, at that moment, my headset was, I know there's going to be a bunch of politicians here, many of whom genuine, and I'm sure that I was just like, I just don't want to hear a speech.
I know.
What it brought up for me, that memorial you talk about, was the night we saw each other at the reading. I ran into an old friend on the street whom I had not seen in 10 years.
Yeah.
Survivor of the AIDS years.
Yeah.
And we both just saw each other and started to cry.
Yeah.
And he said to me, it's like a little brief memory of what it was like when the BAR was 2 full pages of obits about AIDS.
Yeah.
I mean, 49 people isn't 100,000 dead from AIDS, but it was like that wound we all remembered. Oh, well, AIDS is over.
Yeah. Well,
it's like someone skipped it, and that feeling of the 80s, at least for me, came back.
Yeah, and I think that this is why there's no one answer to any one of these questions, because everybody's bringing their individual experience. You and I went through and observed and grieved over a lot of death in the 80s and 90s, and when you have that kind of piece scraped out of you, these part of me just protects against it now, you know what I mean? Against being hurt in that way. But then something like Orlando will get past the fortress, and it hurts. But it's bringing up old hurts too, losses and memories.
Yeah.
There are younger people, of course, for whom this is maybe the very first large, terrifying, horrible attack on queer people.
Well, yeah, especially they were in their 20s. It was like the oldest guy was younger than you and me.
I know, which is not hard to be.
Right. But dum ching.
But so what I love is you were talking about when I was writing at the Sentinel in the 80s and how do we talk about this and what's the history. Back then, gay papers were the way we communicated. Mm-hmm. Gay newspapers that were free in the bars, and now everybody has social media. So what's fascinating to me isn't the question of how will this be seen in 30 years. It's amazing to watch it happen on social media, because everybody is bringing their individual experience based on their age and their length in the community and their feelings about even guns. Some people love guns and see why they should be a part of our lives, but don't agree with this kind of gun. I mean, there's no black and white here. So to me, the ongoing story on social media is fascinating to me.
Mm-hmm. What did you think about the congressional sit-down? John Lewis, icon.
I loved it. Because again, remember I told you my first cynical feeling when I read about and heard about Orlando was, well, but nothing is going to get done. Nothing may get done, but to see politicians sitting, performing a sit-in was amazing. I was like, oh, somebody's actually doing something that symbolically at least means something to me.
Yeah, I remember there was a congressman from North Carolina, first-term Republican, who shall go nameless, who said this does a disservice to Woolworths, meaning, of course, the sit-ins that African Americans did at Woolworth counters during the Civil Rights era, where they would sit at a counter reserved for whites, and instead of moving, the people who owned the counter poured ketchup on their heads. Yeah. And I remember thinking, you are too white and too stupid to even use the word Woolworth in the same breath as this man who had his head cracked open by racist cops in Selma.
But people are gonna say things to who cares? I mean, I agree with you in a way.
So
but
you don't care about the politicization of this?
Well, no. Of course I do.
Yeah.
But I have learned over the years not to take everything every single person says seriously and to attach emotion to it, or else I'll burn the circuits. You know what I mean?
What do you mean?
Well, it's pretty predictable that somebody would come along and say that. It's pretty predictable that others across the aisle from the Democrats sitting down would say, well, this is just political theater. It's all predictable.
Well, you know, you lead me to a question I hadn't thought of, which was how much of this is just yawn?
Well, it depends, I think, on
I mean, do we really deserve to do a whole special show about Orlando? I mean, you know,
Sure.
you've got ISIS, you've got sex slaves being brought in, you've got the migrant crisis.
Yeah, but the thing is,
why is this a big deal? Is it a big deal?
yes and yes, because that's a great question, but that thing that does that naturally wants to do that, we've got these other things happening, that's to diminish the impact of this thing. And you have a TV show called 10%. It's an ongoing conversation about LGBT, et cetera, issues. Of course we should be talking about this until we're done talking about it. So I think it's valid and valuable. And I have to say that because I've been doing this for a long time and observing the gay community and living in it, there's a part of me that sees things in the sweep of history now, because I've been at it for 30 or 40 years. And I can get complacent. Like, good, we got marriage equality, you know, we're cool. And then this happens. We should be talking about this because as Cesar said, you know, people get kicked out of their homes still for being gay. It's ongoing. Of course we talk about this.
We've got just a minute left. What would you like to leave as your impressions of Orlando?
I like the spiritual axiom that there are really two responses to anything, which are love and fear. Fear engenders separation, persecution, judgment, criticism, loathing, rage, etc., right? And then love is love. So you try to embrace everything and everybody about it. Now, there were people on Facebook that were saying, I don't want to hear about love and prayers, I want action. Sure, but you can take action based on love.
Right. Thanks, Dave. It's always a pleasure being with you.
Same. Can't wait to see you again.
Thanks for watching 10%. I'm David Perry. Thanks for watching our continuing conversation about Orlando and, more importantly, being a member of our community. Good night.